all the folks here. How's everybody doing this this Tuesday morning?
Doing good.
Love it,
Good morning,
Colton.
Jack.
Everyone have a good 4-day weekend, 3-day weekend, whatever it was.
It's good. A lot of studying, a lot of football.
I know it was a good football weekend. My kids had a hard time accepting the fact that they had to get up and get in gear this morning. They wanted to lay in bed and read books all day. It's like, guys, it's the school day. You get back on it.
Mine's the same way.
Yeah, yeah, I felt the same way. It's like, oh, my alarm coming real early this morning. One personal success story. This is completely unrelated to sales, but indulge me. I got to do my first SR, like surveillance and reconnaissance mission, is leaving the Navy over the weekend. We had a cat escape last Sunday, and through interviewing all of our neighbors, found out that she was pretty close by and coming out around midnight. I set up the crib camera. We have a little digital crib camera. I set it up in our back door, looking out the window, and set up my phone to alert me whenever something set off a motion sensor. So learned that she was coming back every few hours, trying to get back in the door. And so I opened the door, left a breadcrumb of cat treats into the house, and just basically laid there in warmies in a sleeping bag, watching the door with the alert set up to wake me up if she came in. And so she came in, she dodged me a couple times and got back out. And then third time around 1 a.m. she got. So I was the hero the next morning because my kids were like, "Yay, the cat's back!" It was awesome. But I was like, this is fun. I haven't done an Overwatch in a while. So something to look forward to as you guys get out into the civilian world, is you have little throwbacks every now and then to your military career.
Get it back any way you can, right, Jack?
Yeah, man. I was like, at the time I was like, I could do this for like a living. I could be like a cat hunter and help people rescue their missing cats, but I don't think there's much money in that market. Yeah, exactly. My cats won't keep a collar on though. We'd have to like glue it to them or something. Anyway, that was my that's my BNR for the day. Anybody else got any fun stories from other than football and family and stuff?
I'm actually doing the same thing because I'm getting my fence replaced at my house. So I have all the material in the back after they removed the whole fence, right? So I'm kind of like sleeping here near the window with my camera on, and I also have it on. It'll alert me, if somebody passes through.
Yeah, no, that's smart. So you're watching on your materials not to get stolen. That's cool. Talita, just to give you an idea, so BNR, or bonding and rapport, in the sales process is the first thing you do, right? It helps establish equal business stature, so we're all on the same level, right? Your prospect isn't way up on a pedestal. You're some lowly salesperson. It's like, hey, we're just people talking, and it helps establish a human emotional connection with the person you're talking to.
Okay.
So
and you said B&R stands for what?
B&R, bonding and rapport.
Bonding and rapport. Okay.
Yeah. And if anyone has the worksheet we've been working on for the sales funnel, they want to share it with Talita just so she can kind of have an idea what we've done to this point. You'll get it in cohort Bravo, Talita, just to might be something that's nice. But thanks, Brandon. So just me today. You guys will have John tomorrow. I'll be out of pocket. So today, what I thought we'd do is get a little more into the weeds about cybersecurity and how to have a conversation about cybersecurity with prospects, questions to ask, overcoming objections, and whatnot. So I will share screen. Give me a thumbs up when you guys see my screen. Got it. So demystifying cybersecurity. The screen sharing bar pops up and blocks all of my tabs, which makes it fun trying to navigate. So we'll make that a little bigger so everyone can read, old eyes like me. So this is just the Intelisys vendor independent guide to selling cybersecurity. So when I say vendor independent, I mean there's not like a company that's putting this out to sell their product. Right? Intelisys doesn't make any cybersecurity products. They're just a distribution company. So we sell from a supplier neutral or supplier independent position, meaning we don't work for any vendor. We're not particularly committed to any one solution from any vendor. It's just we understand the general state of technology and what companies need from a vendor neutral perspective. And so before we jump into that, does that part of what we do make sense to everybody? I'm guessing there's nods and stuff. I don't see you guys anymore, but yeah, sweet. So knowing the basics, right? You don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to be able to sell cybersecurity. You, in fact, probably shouldn't be, right? If you're the expert and you can actually do the thing, it's hard to pull yourself out of the situation, understand it from the customer perspective, and let your sales, let your engineering and smart tech people do their job. So these are the kind of general buckets of basics that we're going to try and understand is the attacks. These are the threats and stuff that are happening. You can Google cybersecurity or cyber attack and sort by new or recent and just see what's happening in the world if you really want to gain an up-to-date perspective. But we'll kind of focus on the generic buckets that are out there. The defenses, right? What measures and solutions can be put in place to help defend, and then what are the services that exist that we can sell, nomenclature, whatnot. So, first up is malware, right? Everyone heard that term before, but it's often misused or misunderstood. It's really just a blanket term for any malicious software, right? It's not something that you need to talk a whole lot about, because most of your customers are going to kind of have a general understanding of it, but you do need to know what is meant when people talk about malware. Phishing is, we've talked about that last week. So you guys, in that conversation we had about the social engineering self-defense, we talked about the different types of phishing, from email, which most people understand, to you could phish with a postcard if you wanted to. You could phish text message, QR code. There's even malicious like chat bots, right? So if I wanted to pretend to be, let's say I wanted to spoof 7 Eagles domain, right? I could take 7 Eagles domain, change it by a digit, and then have a mirror image of their website on my spoofed domain, and then put a little chatbot in there. And that chatbot pretends to be 7 Eagle. It pretends to talk like them, and it's going to ask you for information that 7 Eagle would want, and then collect it, with ill intent. So there's all different types of phishing that can happen. I think just understanding from a high level what phishing is, and it's a blanket term for any kind of a social engineering attempt. You're trying to trick somebody into giving up something they shouldn't, right? Could be credentials, could be over the phone, could be in person, right? You can do in-person social engineering, phish for information. So before I keep talking, does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts about malware or phishing? Pretty straightforward, but these are just kind of the basics of the industry. So knowing these words, knowing these terms, going to help you have conversations with people smartly. So anything?
Are you gonna be able to share that PDF with us, Jack?
Yes, I can do that. Let's see. Probably have to stop sharing because this thing is going to kill me. Let me just stop sharing for a second and I'll drop this in the chat. Let's see. So downloads. So here's one. So you've got cybersecurity guide, and the second one will be the second document we'll get into today, but those are the two that we'll work off today. I saw a thumbs up. Sweet. Okay, so to get back on the horse. Okay. Back up and sharing. So has anybody experienced phishing firsthand, right? Has anybody ever been the victim of phishing?
I haven't been victim of it, but I get hit all the time, like more than ever. And I think we've talked about that before, and I doubt I'm the only one.
Yeah, I think the trick question is every one of us has been the victim of phishing, whether we know it or not. You've gotten phishing emails for sure. You've gotten sometimes phishing emails and just like marketing spam seem really indistinguishable because they're not that different, right? It's a numbers game for both, high volume email marketing people and phishing campaigns, right? And we've talked about in the past, the only difference is intent, right? If you're getting marketing emails, at least ostensibly you've given permission to receive those communications to that company, and from phishing you haven't. So, phishers don't care about ethics or laws typically because they're doing it from somewhere else in the world where those laws can't reach them. So it really just boils down to intent, permission, consent, that kind of stuff. But the tactics, the technology being used for that stuff is almost indistinguishable from, a traditional email marketing campaign. So we've all seen, spam emails. I tell you, I didn't tell you guys this story. If I did, please stop me. But last week we got someone filled out a web form for more information on Dad's website. They said they were from the public school district in North Carolina, and they're looking for IT hardware. They gave a name, they gave an email, they gave a phone number, but it was a strange request, right? They were asking for IT hardware for a company that makes warehouse software. So didn't pass the smell test, but I investigated anyway, and it turns out that somebody was using a real employee at this public school system with slightly altered email and phone number to phish people, right? Filling on web forms and hope that company reaches back out to them and start a conversation. Who wants to take a guess at what emotion was being targeted or leveraged in that attack? No guesses?
Urgency.
Urgency, yeah, potentially. You got to think that it's probably a limited window to win business if they're putting out an RFP like that or putting out a request for solicitation. You got to imagine there's probably 10 other salespeople that are scrambling to get in that person's inbox. So urgency. What was another one? Anyone? I gave you guys the answer. It's greed, right? That's the one that we're most vulnerable to as salespeople. Is I want to make a sale, right? This guy is a public school system with probably hundreds, if not thousands, of students and teachers and administrators. That's a big, juicy, opportunity. Looking to buy some IT hardware. I don't even sell IT hardware. We can, but I've explicitly not done that in the past because it's not the business we want to be in. But my greedy salesperson brain was like, it's an opportunity. I don't know what they want. Go check it out. It's that curiosity, greed, and urgency. So really 3 emotions kind of come into play there. Just saying that because we're just as vulnerable as our customers and prospects are, and understanding that where they are is a good place to be. So, well, let's see, other examples of phishing might include, email from your new boss. So if you guys get hired here in the next couple months, the new sales role, you get a strange request from your boss asking you to click a link for employee onboarding, or, hey, can you go out to the CVS and buy me, 50 gift cards or, 50 $100 gift cards and scratch off the back and give me the PIN numbers? Like strange requests, right? Or if they're just asking you for something that they could potentially ask you for, right? Hey, this is the CFO. I need you to email me, go into this folder and email me this thing. So, anybody recall what the best practice is for if you get something that doesn't pass your smell test? Okay. The answer is contact them via a trusted method. So if you get a strange email from your boss or just some C-level person asking you to do something weird, don't reply to the email. Don't just do it. Call the person, right? You use the phone number that you already know for them. Don't use the phone number given in the email. Contact them via another trusted method. If you have them on cell phone, if you have their office phone, if you're in the same building, just walk down the hall and ask them, hey, are you asking me for a spreadsheet with all of our financial information on it? No. Okay, well, your email just did, right? I mean, that's the being kind of paranoid is a good thing. That's what we try and coach our clients on is healthy paranoia, building your culture around that. So anyway, that's enough on phishing. Anybody have questions on that? Pretty basic concept. Takeaway here, as you guys can see here, many phishing emails can and will be caught in spam filters, but if you have a culture that says, hey, we have spam filters in place, we don't need to worry about this, you're just ripe for getting hacked, right? They won't catch everything. Plenty of new phishing email templates are coming out that won't be caught in spam filters. You know, if someone's email gets compromised, if there's a business email compromise, then that's definitely not getting caught in spam because it's a trusted email, trusted domain. So don't rely on technology to save you. It takes training and culture to also defeat this stuff. So exploit, this is really a generic term, but in the cybersecurity context, it's something that an attacker can use to take advantage of a vulnerability, right? Could be unpatched firewall, could be a 0 day. 0 day means it's never been used before in the wild, so no people or technology know what to look for. So 0 days are often pretty rare and only used in kind of high profile situations, but doesn't mean they don't exist. So any thoughts on exploits, what that means from a security perspective? So this could be, I mean, most of the time an exploit is user error on the target's end, right? So if you're the IT admin for a company, you leave a certain port on a firewall open, it's like leaving your back door unlocked, right? Someone could just walk up, open the door, and you let them in essentially. So a lot of times, you know, basic blocking and tackling is, you know, make sure you don't have any exploitable vulnerabilities that could be just easily fixed without even spending any money, right? So you don't have to, there's no, you know, you can pay for like software or services that do periodic scans on your network to look for these known exploits. But you know, you don't have to. You could just have somebody vigilant on staff that goes and checks those things. So cool. DDoS, or distributed denial of service. Anyone heard of this? Nods, heads. You guys don't have to unmute, but yeah, DDoS. This one is interesting because it's pretty, you know, low level of technology required to do a DDoS. It's essentially just if you've got a website or a service, it's inundating that website or service with traffic to the point that it shuts down. So like ChatGPT, for example, we talked about that. It's down right now because there's too many people trying to access it. So legitimate user traffic is DDoSing ChatGPT. So it doesn't have to be malicious. It can just be, hey, the traffic to your website is so voluminous that the website keeps shutting down, right? The server can't process all that traffic, so it just crashes. So, but in this case, they're done by malicious botnets. So people distribute malware, right? Malware takes your computer or device, turns it into adds it to a network of bots, meaning someone else can remotely control it and tell it to do stuff. So say you have 1 million computers infected with your malware, you can then direct those 1 million computers to go to someone's website at the same time, which causes their website to crash, which leaves them, you know, in the dark and they can't do anything. So, you know, this is pretty common. There's a lot of services out there that block DDoS or detect DDoS attempts, and those are available for sale. So something we can help with. I'm just going to keep chugging through. If you guys have questions, I'm not going to ask at the end of every section here. I'm just going to, if you guys have questions, raise a hand or unmute and just ask them. So see here, this is having a DR plan helps. So in general, blanket statement, if your company doesn't have a plan for these things proactively, you're planning to fail, right? You're planning to be behind the 8 ball if you get hit with a DDoS or a ransomware or something like that. So having a backup plan, having a disaster recovery plan, you know, maybe you host your website in a server somewhere and that building gets hit by a tree during a tornado. Now that server is down, right? That's just as important for, you know, to have a plan for as a DDoS attack does. So having a disaster recovery plan not limited to DDoS or any one of these things. It's just in general, if something bad happens that puts your business offline, what's the plan, right? What's plan B in case plan A doesn't work? So that's kind of the gist of a lot of these conversations. So that's all we're going to cover for the attacks. So does anybody have any questions? Are there any attacks that you think we should talk about that aren't mentioned here?
I have one for you, Jack, real quick.
Yep.
A while back, one of my tech topics involved talking about bot attacks. And so I looked on one of the the active maps, the real times that show you what's going on in the world right now.
Yep.
And bot attack was the lowest. And I swear I did the same thing about a year ago, and it was like a top one. When you're out there and you're talking with clients, do you see a lot of DDoS concerns, or are you dealing with anything like that lately?
Not typically, and it does go up and down year to year, right? The attackers tend to do what works, and they're kind of like a copycat industry like everybody else. So if DDoS attacks are having impact and working, it might be copycats and a string of DDoS. There has been kind of a pendulum swing in the ability to mitigate DDoS across a number of levels. So like ISPs, for example, can kind of spot and help throttle traffic they believe is being used to DDoS somebody. So you might not have to do anything. The DDoS just might never get to you because some ISP in the middle or some other provider saw it and spotted it. It still happens, but it's not one of the drivers of conversations that I find most effective or most often. So the one that I talk about most is ransomware, and that one falls under malware. But so worth talking about just for a second. Ransomware is probably the #1 form of malware. What's up, Mark?
The other day I read about like IoT devices which start infected by Stuxnet. It's one of those, like especially like major, especially the Department of Energy. They're utilizing some of those, like kind of like managing like kind of like their infrastructure.
Yeah.
Even like mostly like Siemens, I think one of them right now are like having those threats being in there. I don't know if where does it belong. It could be like malware too, but at the same time like a spyware being installed. But I think it's one of those right now on the radar of those like having those like an issue or the current issue right now.
Yeah, no, I mean the IoT security issue is huge. What that means, just in the best layman's terms that I can put it, again, I'm not the security tech guru, but is Stuxnet and other IoT attacks take control of industrial processes, so that these what are they called? PLU, programmable logic units.
Yeah.
That exist on, they're kind of like the last mile between like the internet and then the machine that actually does a thing. It's like how you tell that machine how to interpret signals and stuff. Those are vulnerable, and if you can control and modify the PLUs on an industrial machine, you can get it to change the way it operates, right? So the attack that best embodies this is, I think, it was on the Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities done by the Israelis a couple of years ago, and they actually got a thumb drive with the malware on it into that network. So they had an inside man or woman, I don't know. They put a thumb drive into the Iranian. There was a lab where they were enriching uranium. You use these centrifuges that spin really fast to enrich the uranium, and they changed the PLUs on those centrifuges to spin slightly faster than was safe and break them. They couldn't work anymore. So the Israeli, cyber attack on Iran's centrifuges set them back years in their ability and their capacity to enrich uranium. So that's an industrial, like IoT attack, but it goes both ways, right? One of the problems with cybersecurity is once an attack's been done in nature, copycats just follow. The stuff gets, the code gets out into the wrong hands and now comes back at us. So blowback from.
Now, is there an Intelisys platform that can we offer, or just in case like that, if like customers or like client is asking about it, or any like victims?
So the question you're asking, is there a platform or a solution from Intelisys?
Yeah, the Intelisys side, in your experience right now, that could.
Yeah, so we can get into that in a second. Once I get through this guide, I'll pull up the IoT tab. But yeah, short answer is there are industrial IoT or IIoT solution providers in the platform, in the Intelisys platform for sure. Okay, but ransomware, just to close the loop on that, ransomware is, universally, social engineering and phishing is how these things are getting in, right? There's a less than 10% chance that is not involved in the attack. So typically the attack goes something like someone in the company clicks on a phishing email, or they pick up a thumb drive they found in the parking lot, or they, do something over the phone. bottom line is that that person's account gets compromised, and then they use that compromised account to get somewhere else in the network, right? Gain admin privileges. And then the ransomware is they found something important to your company. Could be a system, could be a database somewhere, could be all the above. They deploy ransomware, which is software that basically encrypts all of the data, all of the things that you need to use to run your business, and then sends you a notice on your screen that says, unfortunately, you've been infected with the Lockbit ransomware or whatever. And to restore operations or restore access to your files, you're going to have to pay X amount of Bitcoin, and you have 12 hours to do so. So that's what ransomware looks like. That's probably the number one attack vector that we see and we hear people talking about, either being the victim of ransomware, paying ransoms often is what the outcome is. And so we'll get into that into the questions in a little bit later, but that's kind of burying the lead here. Ransomware should be top of the list, in my opinion. So, okay, so moving on down to the defenses, right? These are the things that businesses can put in place to help mitigate or stave off some of these attacks. So these are all supplier neutral, none of these are proprietary. So firewall could be virtual, could be a physical box, could be a cloud-based, virtual technology, but at the end of the day, it's the barrier that sits between the internet, the public internet, and your private network. So this is, think about it like a bouncer with a guest list, right? They've got a list of typically, just say like 5,000 known malicious things in its database. And so every time something comes through your firewall, it gets checked against those 5,000 rules. And if any of those rules are met, it says, okay, this is blocked, right? It could be simple stuff like blocking, YouTube or Netflix or something like that. It could also be like, hey, this is a known exploit, right? This is a, Lockbit ransomware is attached to this email. We're going to block that, right? So problem with firewalls is that if there's 5,000 things you can tell it to look for, the more you add to that list, the slower your traffic becomes, right? Your bouncer has to go through every page on that list to see if they're, prohibited or not. And so you're adding overhead to your internet traffic, making it slower. So that's the balancing act of the firewall. So people will often keep that list relatively small to keep traffic optimized, but there's always going to be stuff that's not on that list, and the firewall is not going to spot it. So firewalls are good. You need to have them in place. You can sell them. They're not the end all be all. A lot of companies will say, hey, we have a firewall. What else do we need to worry about? Not the end all be all. We like security in depth. Again, you guys just chime in with questions if you have anything. I'm going to try and work through this stuff. Virtual private network, VPN. Most of you probably use this in the military, right? If you're overseas and you want to watch Netflix, VPN gets you back to, San Jose, California or whatever, where you can watch VPN. So think of this as just an encrypted private tunnel that you can create from where you are to where your work resources are. Helps kind of obscure what you're doing. So harder for an attacker to find out where you are and what you're doing, what you're accessing. But this is something we can sell too. So, just so you guys know, but I think pretty much everyone, especially in the military, has at least heard of a VPN. So I won't spend too much time hanging out here. Email security gateway protection. This is just, again, this is another layer of security on email. So it's like a firewall for email is the way I think about it. So anything that's coming through your email, it's got a gateway that says these rules are, you have to meet these rules to get through. Or if you don't meet these rules, you're going to get blocked. I like to use the analogy of a tightrope. So every day you're asking your employees to walk a tightrope when they're working in email, right? One second. Sorry, my dog's running around doing something squirrely. So if you were charged with making sure that your employees get across the tightrope every day, are you comfortable just giving them a net underneath the tightrope? Or are you comfortable just training them to walk the tightrope with no net? Or would you like them to have a net and training to walk the tightrope? I vote both, because if you just send them out there preparing to fall into the net, that's not a very good plan, right? You just send them out there, no net, but a lot of training, they're probably going to be okay, but every now and then they're going to fall and then they're going to, die. So training plus net, the secure email gateway kind of is the net there, right? So a lot of people like to rely on the net. Not a big fan of that. It's kind of setting people up for failure. So, and then end user education. This is the training I just mentioned, right? Net plus training. So nobody can prevent human error, but training and education typically it's awareness centric, right? Like right now, I'm not trying to make you guys experts on different security, defensive technology, just enough to know that it's out there and what it's used for, and what type of threat it might help mitigate against. So, similar to you guys, you shouldn't want your customers to be experts in security. They don't need to know the latest malware or what the latest, ransomware gang name is. None of that's relevant to the end user. What is that, hey, there's people out there that know a lot about you based on your public profile on social media and whatnot, publicly available information, previous data breaches. They know a lot about you, so they can pretend to be someone that you know and trust, and they're trying to trick you. That's really what you want people to internalize. And once people see that, and you have a culture in the company that rewards people reporting suspicious stuff, doesn't punish people that make mistakes, like clicking on a phishing email, then you start to have this, flywheel effect of a strong security culture that it's a lot harder to break into if everyone's, skeptical and asking questions kind of in a paranoid state. So, and this number right here, 25% of data breaches, that's woefully inadequate. I think that's more closer to like 80 or 90. So, yeah, I mean, I've used this before. You guys heard me say it, but who would you take in a fight? 20 SEALs fighting naked with sticks and stones, or 20 random people off the street with a full SEAL team loadout? Answer is pretty clear. I'd rather have the trained group with no equipment than the equipped group with no training. So you want both, but I think I put a priority on training. So let's see what's next here. So this is the services, right? This is where we get into what we can sell. And this is again from a supplier neutral. So none of these are supplier, branded. These things will take different names and they'll have different flavors with different vendors and how they do things. But broadly, this is what we do. So security as a service is basically, as opposed to hiring people to be your full-time security employees, you're outsourcing it to a third party. So security assessments, these are things that I use as a monkey's fist, right? An assessment is a good way to start when a company doesn't know where they are, what they want to do, or if they even need help. What if we just do an assessment, usually costs like 20 grand for a company of your size, and give you at least a snapshot of where you are in time with some suggestions of how to make it better. That's a good way to get started. So, and this is universally applicable depending on, it could be a 5-person company, 5-person nonprofit, or a 50,000, for-profit business that's Fortune 100. The security assessment can be as simple or as complicated and in depth as this customer's environment allows, right? So if you've got 5 people in a nonprofit using Gmail and a shared, Google Drive account, that's you meet them where they are, right? You still need to have a good password policy. You still need to have 2-factor authentication. That all the low-hanging fruit and basics can be kind of covered in a security assessment. It's also a really good way to learn the customer's environment, right? So if you want to sell them, let's just say cloud services or virtual infrastructure, doing a security assessment, you're going to learn about their virtual infrastructure and cloud services environment doing that assessment. So it serves 2 purposes. One, you can make some money selling us an assessment, and 2, you learn what they're doing and how they're doing it and what vendors they have and potentially how long they have left with those vendors. And so that's all helpful information to know as a salesperson, because they're like, hey, your virtual firewall license is expired and you're on a month-to-month contract with the vendor now. Like, that's good information to know from a sales perspective, because you might want to sell them a better firewall than what they have today, if that's relevant. And then, so assessment is just kind of a outside looking in, hands-off thing, right? You're not actually trying to compromise their network during a security assessment, right? That changes with a pen test. So a pen test is like an assessment where you're actually trying to break in. right? So if I do a drive by your house, maybe walk around a little bit, look to see if anything looks open or vulnerable, ask you some questions about, what you do for home security, that's an assessment. Penetration test is I'm going to try and break in, right? That is something that's typically more expensive. If you did it without permission, it would be illegal. So you have to get, permission from the company, typically baked into the contract. The scope is really important to define, because if you say, hey, we're gonna, this is our scope, and then you do something outside of scope, you're violating that contract with the customer and violating their trust. So like, for example, and if it's out of scope, typically to lie to employees of that company, right? If you misrepresent yourself to the employees and lie to them, that's violation of the scope and no bueno. So scope for a pen test is good to outline before you actually start. You don't want to be doing it while it's ongoing. There's two types. There's an internal pen test, which is you assume you have access to the network, and typically the customer is going to give you information about that, right? How many internal IPs does your company maintain? What are some of the systems or resources or software platforms that you use? Maybe who are some of the key people? So they're giving you answers to the test in a lot of ways, versus an external pen test, which is just a full, I'm pretending to be an attacker with no inside knowledge, and I'm just trying to see what I can exploit. So we're actually doing one right now for a client that's both. They want both an internal, external pen test. So that's, about as robust as it gets, right? We've got one team pretending to be outsiders trying to get in. Other teams got the keys to the kingdom, and they're trying to see where all the vulnerabilities lie, what they can do with it. Because the attacker could get in and turn it into an internal attack pretty easily. That's typically what happens. And so, and then here you can see credentials. Like, that's just, do they have stolen credentials or do they not, right? You can choose to say, hey, let's just assume that the attackers have found some stolen credentials on the dark web, typically how they'll get hold of those from a previous breach. So you can also say, hey, none assumed, only use what you can find online, right? So you wanted a true external pen test with no credentials, that probably give you the best idea of what an attacker could do. But if you wanted to really know where the vulnerabilities were in kind of the worst case, give credentials and an internal pen test, they're going to really do a number on your team. So typically these are things that if you're doing pen test, you want to do 1 or 2 a year, and it's a good idea to rotate vendors. So if you have one vendor that does all your pen tests, they might get stale. They might kind of get used to penetration, trying to get into your network. They put blinders on, right? They just want to keep that recurring contract. They don't really want to do a whole lot more work. So from a customer perspective, we want probably to rotate vendors at least yearly, if not every time. So that's where the independent nature of what we do helps. We can stay with the customer throughout the process and just bring different vendors to the table to do penetration tests. So that is pen test. So SIEM, security information and event management. This is a way to log activity in the customer's environment. So when something happens, it's logged somewhere, and you can go back and reference those logs. And it's not just for anomalous security events, it's just any activity in your network. So login attempts that are legitimate are stored in your SIEM. Login attempts that are illegitimate are stored in your SIEM. Really, anything event-wise that takes place in your environment is logged in this thing. So what this is applicable to is you can potentially use it to investigate potentially bad activity on your network. Something happens, go to your SIEM, see what happened. And you can see if someone tried to cover their tracks, someone tried to alter a file, all that stuff kind of shows up in your SIEM. It's also really applicable for companies that are doing PCI compliance. So payment credit card information, PCI, I think is what it stands for. But anyone that takes credit cards for payment has to comply with PCI standards, and using a SIEM helps do that. So you have to be able to testify to the PCI, regulators and say, here's all the stuff that happened in our payment, our credit card environment over the last year, right? You can prove that we'd have a SIEM. We can prove that there was no, theft of credit cards or whatever, and you use that SIEM data to do that. So, and again, can be maintained either in-house or deployed as a service of a third party. So these are a bear. They can be a bear to manage. We're helping a customer right now who's had a couple of bad SIEM deployments and they're looking for a better option. So, and then you can, this is just boilerplate here at the end. So this is a really kind of down and dirty guide to what's going on in cybersecurity. Does anybody have any questions or comments or things we didn't cover that you think we should in that guide?
Well, I just like the tidbit, Jack, about rotating the vendors. You and John have both been pushing personal relationship with the client. And I think if you added that extra little tidbit with them, I could only think that they're like, hey, this guy is on our side. He is looking out for us. That's smart.
Yeah, and that's great. That's kind of the nature of how we work as independent sales agents. But imagine you're working for a company that does penetration tests or something else, and imagine how powerful it would be if you said, hey, it's best practice for, use us once a year, but use another vendor once a year, right? You're saying that goes a lot longer if you're a direct salesperson and telling them to use somebody else for half their pen tests. Because if you just say, yep, use us for everything, we got you covered. That's what most salespeople are saying. Very few are going to say, for your sake, you should probably use another vendor at least half the time to get to, it's like getting a second opinion from a doctor, right? If you just trust that one doctor implicitly, you might not know. He might not be an SME in the thing that you got going on. So, yeah, that's a good tidbit to keep with you. So I'm going to try and get through this next one. We have about 17 minutes left, so I will try and make it snappy. These are kind of the questions that you can ask as you're kind of having security conversations with the customer. So I'll bring this down. Okay, so just a general idea. This is something you can use internally. So we've done the learning part, right? You guys see on the right side, learn. Now we're prospecting for this. So if you're sitting down with the customer, you've got a list, this is not a very long list, and you're reading these, you're asking these questions, have a conversation about them. If the customer says yes to 2 or more of these things, it's a good idea that, decent chance you have a prospect there that could use your help. So would you like to better understand your system's biggest threats and vulnerabilities? If yes, obviously, then you can help, right? If no, great. What makes you so confident, right? What is it about your current setup that, what are you doing that's making you so confident, right? I'm curious. I want to learn from what you're doing. Do you have any concerns, cybersecurity concerns within your company? Right? That's a really general thing. If they say no, great. You can't make them be concerned. I don't want to try and scare people. But again, what makes you so confident, right? Most of the people I talk to are terrified of this stuff. They lay awake at night in a cold sweat, worried about ransomware shutting down their business. What are you doing that makes you so different, right? You're not challenging them. You're seeking to learn from them. So, they might tell you, hey, we've got this vendor. They're super squared away, and they've been great. And that's a genuine answer that means they're probably not a great prospect for you. Is there a cybersecurity expertise gap on your team? This one's huge. The cybersecurity talent gap is like 3.5 million open jobs in the US right now for cybersecurity professionals. So you guys are in a good field to be in. But ask your prospect, how's your company doing for cybersecurity talent? Are you having a hard time recruiting and retaining these folks? Do you even think you need them, right? Are you concerned, or do you have reservations about the current level of security? This is kind of a wordy, I would change this one to maybe less words, but does anything worry you within your company about cybersecurity, right? They might tell you X, Y, or Z. You do for a pen test, right? A lot of times this is an easy way to get in. It's like, when's your next pen test, right? Assuming you rotate vendors, do you have another vendor lined up for your upcoming pen test? Let us be those people for you. Do you need a recovery plan to address a cybersecurity breach or emergency? Or do you have a plan for ransomware? Colonial Pipeline's a great story to use there. Colonial Pipeline leadership went before Congress and testified that they had never discussed what to do in the case of ransomware until it happened. So do you have a plan in case this happens to your business? You can say, do you have a plan for when this happens to your business? Because it's going to happen eventually. Do you have any compliance support? I would say, do you have any compliance needs? Does your company have to comply with any external regulations, right? It could be PCI. If you're a credit card, it could be HIPAA. If you're in the medical space, GDPR. If you have any business in Europe, had a customer that had most of their operations in the US, but they had a really big opportunity to win a contract in Europe. And they're like, what is GDPR? This prospect just asked us about that. Like, can you help us with GDPR? I was like, yes, we can help you meet GDPR compliance. So, and that's increasingly driving these conversations, right? One of the truths that I've learned is that almost nobody is buying security stuff because they want to. It's because they have to. It's a regulation that's going to make them pay through the nose if they don't do it. It's customers asking about their security plan and they don't have anything to say. Or they've been breached, right? Or they had an actual thing happen to them that changed their mind about investing in security. So compliance is a big one, though. Do you have any cloud initiatives? How much of your business is in the cloud today? Not that that's a direct security question, but it is a good question to discover how they're deployed. Are they all premise-based? Are they all in the cloud? Some sort of hybrid? Are they moving to the cloud? Where are they in that journey? And then how do you manage passwords, right? Some of these questions I think suck the way they're worded, but are you using a password manager? Does your company have a password policy? So this is something that, you could say, hey, if you're using a password manager, are you using LastPass? Because they just had a breach that exposed, source code and customers' vaults to attackers. So we could help you get off LastPass if you have LastPass. So just some ideas about, these are conversation starters that you can use to have a conversation with your prospect about cybersecurity. So once they're interested, right, this is kind of like, yes, they've raised their hand and you guys agreed that they have some gaps in cybersecurity. This is how you kind of further qualify stuff. So when was the last time you had someone do an assessment on your company? The answer is likely going to be never. For a small and medium business. For a medium to large business, it might be, last year. Follow-up question could be something like, what were the results? Did you pass? Or, I had a hospital system tell me that their last assessment, they failed with flying colors. They were unsecure across the board. So what's your company's approach to cybersecurity today? Do you have a cybersecurity program, right? Do you have a dedicated staff or budget for cybersecurity? Who's in charge, right? Who's responsible? Who owns the program? That's been one of the best conversation starters that I've used is asking them about ownership and accountability. And typically it's doesn't exist, right? No one owns it. It's kind of a, well, this guy's got part of it and this guy's got part of it and no one's actually responsible for it overall. So if the buck doesn't stop with one person, then typically it's probably not very good and you can come in and be that person for them. So how are you educating your employees on cybersecurity best practices? This is a huge one. If they're doing anything, it's probably more of a click box kind of like Army Knowledge Online or Navy Knowledge Online type training. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? The garbage, click through every 6 months, awareness training type stuff. That's garbage. It doesn't really change anything about the way you conduct business. So they could say nothing, in which case you could offer something. They could say, we're doing this. And you could say, hey, that's awesome. You could say, that's we did that in the Navy, it sucked. What are your cybersecurity concerns, right? Tell me more about that, right? That's kind of a follow-up to one of the first questions. Have you had any discussions that were prompted by recent events, right? So Colonial Pipeline for people in the energy sector, Marriott Hotels breach a couple years ago for people in hospitality, fill in the blank, right? If you're an industrial manufacturing company, look at these IoT attacks that have happened in the last couple months or years. So what from, and this is really one of my favorites because it's, read current events and be able to tell stories, right? I collect stories from prospects, from contacts, from customers about what's happened in their world from cybersecurity perspective, and then use those stories to sprinkle into conversation that helps people kind of place themselves in the world, right? If you're just having this vague conversation about cybersecurity and they're in a bubble, in a vacuum, doesn't relate to anything that they can see or feel or touch. If you say, hey, someone in your industry had this happen to them a couple months ago, and we helped them out with X, Y, or Z, that places it in their brain a lot tighter. They can say, oh, I know those guys. They're our biggest competitor, or we buy from them, or whatever. It helps kind of ground the conversation in real reality, and so it's not as ethereal of an idea. Again, regulatory compliance standards, PCI, HIPAA, SOX, Dodd-Frank, FISMA. There's so many different compliance requirements. It'll make your head spin. We could do a whole day on that if we wanted to. End of the day, asking them what standards they need to meet. Could be like ISO 27001, could be NIST. There's one for government defense supply chain manufacturers that's coming online now. It's called CMMC, or Cybersecurity Maturity Matrix Model. CMMC, Cybersecurity Matrix Model Certification. It's a mouthful, but it's meant to be a universal driver's license for doing business with the government. So if you can meet their standards for CMMC, you can qualify for bids. And what's happening in the supply chain industry, just this interesting note, is like if you make stuff that the government buys, if you sell stuff to the Department of Defense, you've technically been supposed to comply with these requirements forever, since the requirements have existed, but they've been self-reported. So, if I'm the regulator, I send you a letter that says, hey, you need to meet X, Y, and Z requirement, send us back, a statement attesting to what you have done. Or if you haven't done it yet, give us the timeline of implementation, when you're going to implement 2FA, when you're going to implement, secure email gateway, or whatever it is. And you just say, yep, we're going to do this next year. And they're like, okay, great, keep doing business with the government. And it's like a 97% rate of not doing what they say they're going to do. The companies have gotten really used to just saying, yep, here's our plan, never actually implementing the plan. So telling the government they're safe when they're not. That's to me, as a national security risk, right? If 97% of the defense supply chain is actually not complying with the security regulations they're supposed to, that's a systemic security risk. And so what CMMC is doing is basically saying, you're going to have to be 100% third-party audited to continue to do business with the government. You're going to have to actually do the things that you're saying you're doing, and some third party is 100% of the time going to come check. You're not going to be allowed to give us a self-report card anymore. So big kind of seismic change happening in the world of defense supply chain, manufacturers and stuff, but it's probably going to be years before that's actually fully online. 2025 at the earliest. So how do you collect data and where is it stored? That's a really good general question for learning about their environment, what data they're housing. I talked to a company a couple of years ago that see the outside of the building, think this is a nothing company, not even really an opportunity. Why am I here? Turns out that they are a combination of direct mailers. So they, at any given time, might have up to a half of all the US citizens like credit data set. Like, it's one of the most harmful data sets you could potentially have. If someone got a hold of it, it's everything you need to know for like a credit report and tax return information. I mean, just every harmful piece of information you could gather on somebody, aggregated into a nice, neat data set. And so their requirements for defending that data were massive, right? That is harmful as it could get. So, and then what antivirus you're using? This is kind of an outdated question. Antivirus is more or less obsolete today. So if someone's just running like a McAfee antivirus program or something like that, that's next to nothing in terms of it's something, but it's really not going to do a whole lot to keep them safe. So, and then just to close this out, so please describe, your policies and practices, right? What does your company have documented with regard to cybersecurity? Might be nothing. Might be we have a binder that has dust on it. Might be we have a program, whatever it is. get a wide range of answers. How do you protect against data theft, right? Another general question that could lead to a lot of different directions. Do you use third-party security vendors today? If so, who? If not, who runs your security program internally? So figuring out what that looks like for them and what they've tried in the past, and again, any of these questions can lead us into the pain funnel, right? So when you set up your call, you're going to ask questions about, their compliance requirements. So you're going to ask questions about previous breaches, questions about their, IT infrastructure and security policy and all that stuff. And you get permission to ask these questions, then you ask the questions. And if any of these lead to a pain that you think is worth, then you say, hey, tell me more about that. And you give me an example of the last time that happened, right? All of this is meant to kind of lead into that conversation. So do you have a documented incident response policy and an approach to security risk management that you can share, right? This one, the documented incident response policy, like very few companies have this. And if they do, ask them when the last time they reviewed them or practiced them, right? I found almost zero companies I talked to, even if they have a policy, they haven't reviewed them in years, and they definitely haven't implemented a dress rehearsal or a fire drill ever. So that's something that I believe pretty strongly in. It's one of the areas we're trying to make headway, is helping people review, improve, and practice their incident response policy. Because you don't want to be sitting in front of Congress testifying that you didn't even have a plan for when you got the ransomware. And then lastly, what are your primary applications and what are their primary security needs, right? So if you're, Spink's gas station, for example, you've got a customer app that you can download, and where does it live? What is how do you keep that secure? What's the biggest risk to that app that would hurt you, and take it offline? So we're running out of time here. You guys have both of these things, so you can kind of see, this is looking for vulnerabilities within their environment. So are you using endpoint protection, right? So endpoint is, again, laptop, tablet, server, printer, anything that connects to the network is the endpoint. Are you protecting those endpoints, right? That's usually where compromise happens first. How are you protecting them? Are you using data centers? If so, where are they? Whose data center? Do you own your own data center or use colocation? We talked about that last week. Do you use any of these big public cloud providers? When was your last pen test? Firewall management? So all follow-up questions to some of the stuff that we've mentioned previously. Similar to stuff here, compliance. These are just kind of like drilling down based on the answers they gave previously.
Jack, can we expect, since we're going over more specifics now, that we're going to practice more with you guys on sales pitches, and I guess be more prepared for a more specific problem that a company's having?
Yeah, so yes, I think once we get through all this stuff, it would make total sense to do some submarine work with this specific stuff in front of you. So you could have in my mind, and I'm working on this for you guys right now, but you'll have essentially, like when I was a JTAC, I got a nice sheet that said, here's your JTAC, template. You can use this for everything. And so you guys can have your submarine. You can, depending on what you're doing, what you're selling, who you're selling with, populate that with the questions that are relevant to your company's products and services. But you'll have a template that you can use for sales regardless. So doing some reps like we did 2 weeks ago, we did the submarine full stem to stern, but doing it in a specific context of having a conversation about cybersecurity with the customer, because we kind of just glossed over that whole part for the submarine practice. So the other piece is we're starting to line up interviews with people in the space. Ideally, they're veterans who have transitioned into tech sales and been successful, and so or they're potentially hiring managers and stuff for cybersecurity firms. And so those conversations will also kind of be reflective of this stuff. If that helps. Okay, and this is all just Intelisys specific stuff. So it's after 12, so I will give you back to Fawn, but I hope that was helpful and informative. I felt like I did most of the talking, which never feels good. Talita, did you have any questions?
No, thank you. I really do appreciate it. And
Yeah.
I have the templates and I'm gonna go over it right after this.
Okay. Well, don't spend too much time spinning your wheels with it. I mean, check it out, get familiar. But if you're going to be in cohort Bravo, then you'll get all of it from the get-go. So,
Okay.
but yeah, if you have any questions, send them to me directly or send them to Fawn or Brenna and they'll get them to us.
Okay. Thank you.
You got it. Well, if nobody has any questions or parting shots for me, I'll turn the group back over to Fawn and you guys can keep on keeping on with your day.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. See you tomorrow.
Thank
You
you,
guys
Jack.
won't see me tomorrow. I'll be out,
Appreciate
but
you.
you'll have John and I'll see you guys Thursday.
All right. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Fawn. Talk to you later.
All righty. All righty. So I'm gonna close all the breakout rooms. Unless you guys need them.
I see online too that says complimentary. Yes, complimentary from the hotel, from the airport.